Hello, everyone. Welcome to Probably at the Library. I'm glad you're back if you joined us for the Social Distancing Book Festival. We have a familiar face to you if you were there. Paullett Golden is with us again today. It's been a crazy start to the video. I was having internet issues. It did not want to cooperate with me today, and I was doing the whole unplug the modem, plug the modem back in, hit refresh 50 times. And here we are. Hopefully Kim will be joining us soon. She might be having internet issues too. You never know. So stay tuned. Hopefully she will be here shortly. And I guess, Paullett, let's start with what you're drinking. What have you got in your... Well, first of all, what are you drinking your tea in? I guess we should start with.
All right. My lovely little teacup there. And this is Earl Grey, because I don't know, I love Earl Grey. I love everything, yeah. But Earl Grey is my go-to for any kind of tea time.
What about fruity teas?
Okay, well, I say I like just about everything. Maybe not so much the fruity teas. I like Darjeeling, oolong, green tea's fine, chai tea's good. Assam is nice on occasion. English breakfast tea is nice on occasion. Sometimes jasmine. Chamomile is really nice before bed.
Yes.
But these are things I mostly drink, alone. I rarely invite friends over for Darjeeling. I'm sure they would like it if I did, but I usually serve them Earl Grey.
I love it. I love Earl Grey is like my go-to tea of choice. The fruity teas, I don't know. They're not my thing. Yeah. So
okay.
You passed the test.
Hey, I was thinking you were gonna go on this, fruity teas are the best, and I would have missed out on
every time I give them a try, and I think I'm gonna find one because my mom loves the fruity teas, and so she's always like, "Try this one, you're gonna love it." And I do, and I'm like, I don't know, I just need a good maybe because I'm a huge coffee drinker, so I tend to go towards the stronger tea.
Yeah.
Ooh, I see Kim. She's
yay!
Into the stream. I give them a try, and I think I'm gonna find one.
Yes, but my camera's.
Pretty keys, and so she's always like, "Try this one, you're gonna love it." And I do, and I'm like, I don't know. I just need. I hear a bounce back from your stream.
Yeah, my camera's turned around.
Where's the stronger? Do you Let's see. What can we do to help you?
Yay!
I turn into the stream. I give them a try, and
there we go. But my camera's.
Try this one, you're gonna love it. And I do, and I'm like,
so why do we have the echo?
That's what I was gonna say. Why do you have another device on or anything, Kim? I can hear everything we say from a minute ago. I do to help you.
Yay!
I turn into the stream. I give them a try, and
But my camera's.
Try this one, you're gonna love it. Okay, I'm going to try to mute Kim and see if we can figure out what is going on. Can you hear me, Kim? Okay, do you have any other browsers open with the video going on? Because I hear that's looping feedback when I turn you on.
Okay, I closed out every other window. Does that help?
Yes.
It must have been some sort of a loop.
Yes, I think we're good now.
Okay. Or alternative, who knows?
We're going to keep our fingers crossed. It has been crazy. My internet cut out 5 minutes before I went to log on. I couldn't get on. I was like, where's Kim? We're just having a crazy day.
Well, and I was watching you, but I couldn't, my link wouldn't load. So now we've got it. This is all a new thing, isn't it?
It is, yes. We're going to figure this technology out together. Welcome, Kim. How are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
We are doing awesome. We were just talking about what we are drinking. So do you want to tell us what you have to drink today?
Yes. This is a friend of mine has Bingley's teas. And this is a nice black tea, Captain Wentworth, which is sort of like a Irish breakfast, which that's what I need right now is extra caffeine. But she does themed teas. She was the first Jane Austen tea person. So I always makes me feel very Jane Austen-y to drink her. So now I have to see. I've set this to steep. I don't know if it's set. But.
You tweeted about them yesterday, so of course I had to look. And they're here in Minneapolis, right by me. Yeah. So I was like, oh my goodness, what a small world. So
I know. I told her that I did, but I don't know if she if she realized that this was going on. So we'll see. But
Yeah.
I'm hoping to do some tea parties too, and then maybe we can have you on. We can discuss books, and Paullett, we can discuss romance. I mean, I love all this talking, and then Julia will do tea. So
yeah, it's such it's such a nice thing with right now that everyone's doing so many chats and book fests, because I think we're all kind of hitting that point of, okay, we've been home for quite a while now. I need some socialization.
Yeah, I love this. I just feel like we're almost together,
Yes.
So pretty good.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for inviting me.
All right, so we talked about what we're drinking. Kim, if you don't mind, I know you just poured your cup of tea, but I'll put you on the spot. I had a lot of people messaging that missed when we did the Zoom Tea and Jane Austen that weren't able to be there. So they wanted to know what they missed out. So I thought maybe we could go back and have your book here. So Kim has this beautiful book, Tea with Jane Austen. I loved reading this so much. Maybe we could go over some of the highlights that we talked about of just tea in general in Regency, England.
Okay.
If you want to tell us, I know we talked about last time just what kind of the social standards for tea were and how hard it was to get tea, taxation, those sorts of things.
Right. Well, by Jane Austen's era, it was very readily available, but still highly taxed. So it was still expensive enough that the Austens locked it up in their cupboard. And if you've been to her house in Chawton, it's in the cupboard in the dining room to the left of the fireplace, and that locked. And we know that Jane Austen herself kept the key to that, and that they kept also the wine in there, and that we know she liked wine. So it wasn't nearly as expensive as when it first began to be imported to England. It was the equivalent of maybe $100 an ounce.
Oh my goodness.
And by Austen's time, it was maybe $100 per pound. $100 per pound. And so even the middle class could afford to drink it. Even the working classes were starting to drink it. Although, variable quality, and people complained. They thought if working classes had enough money to drink tea, then obviously they were being paid too much.
Oh.
Kind of like, if you have a TV now, that's too much.
Right. Oh, that's so funny. And I think we talked a little bit last time about even people re-drying the tea leaves in the kitchen and selling them out the back door to make a little money off of it because tea was so popular.
Right. And that was actually a fairly innocuous thing to do. The cooks and the maids and butlers, they all had their various perquisites that went with the job. And so you could keep candle ends and burn them yourself or sell them. And one of the things that they were often allowed to do was to keep the dregs of the tea after it had been steeped and dry it. And then you would sell that to the people who came around. So there'd be, the rag man and the rag and bone and people looking for linens for paper. And then you could sell them used tea leaves. So they would re-dry that and resell it. Although we know now that you wouldn't have any caffeine left, and who knows what it would taste like. So yeah, that was actually pretty innocuous. The more fun, in a bad sense, things come from, you look at the court cases of the time and you see what people were doing, or the laws that they passed is another good indication of what they were trying to get people to stop doing. So they were adulterating the tea. They would do fake tea. They would dry the leaves of the ash tree, and just plain dried looks like green tea. So I don't know if it's edible, but you see every year or two there's a new law passed. You may not, pass off ash leaves as tea. And people claim that whole areas of Great Britain were denuded of their ash trees because people were selling fake tea. And then they would take that and dry it and mix it with kind of a poisonous black dye that normally was used to dye leather, that sort of thing. Sometimes sheep's dung. So that's fun. And then they would lay it on the floor to dry, and then they would, this is what the Twinings claimed. So you have to take this with a little bit of grain of salt, but then they said they'd have, cattle and things tread on it to break it up, and people would step on it. And So, but either way, possibly poisonous, certainly not good tasting. But it was so popular that even, working class people felt they had to have their tea. So,
right. I can see why the life expectancy was not that long after drinking some of this questionable tea here.
Yeah. Well, any of the food adulterated. You look in the back of any of the old cookbooks, and there are tests that you can do to see if your bread has been adulterated with, chalk or bones or worse. And again, you look at the laws. That's a fun thing. If people know, you can look at the Old Bailey court cases online and just search sometime for, like bread. Like they call it like baker's bread. Very dubious. So
that is,
I don't know, I'm all in favor of the FDA. I like regulation. It's a good thing.
Exactly. Yeah, I know chalk added to milk was a big thing in the States, I guess, early on, because the coloring was so off that they would start dumping in chalk to try to make it white so people would buy it.
Well, and depending on the season, like, winter milk is poorer in quality. City milk was poor. When you see Fanny Price and Northanger Abbey drinking tea that had milk that was kind of blue with a few motes, is what they said in it. So that's obviously skimmed heavily, but also poor quality city milk. And then it carried, tuberculosis, and this is why you'd heat the milk up for children. They didn't really know why, but
right. I think I'm trying to remember. I have your other book here too. This gorgeous book. And I think I remember reading about a letter that Jane Austen had written to Cassandra, and she was talking about the milk in the city and the quality of it, and how she couldn't find a cup of tea that she really enjoyed. And we talked about that from the last time about her cat and mouse search.
Oh, yeah. Tea. Well, that's, I pieced together little, two twigs and make a nest, as she said. But you see a few mentions in her letters where she's talking about, tell me about the new tea and how interested she is, and because she's still a cat if she sees a mouse. And so I picture her pouncing on the new tea, Yeah, she complained about the butter. She wrote to her sister and said something like, my breakfast supplied only 2 ideas, that the bread was good and the butter bad, or something.
Yes, that sounds right. And Paulette, you just sent out your newsletter yesterday, which is a fantastic newsletter for anyone that hasn't signed up. I love it. And it has, this time you had flash fiction, which was amazing. I love the little stories added in. But you had so much information in there about that tradition or transition from coffee house that we saw in the 1600s into tea rooms, and what that involved, kind of as it moved from the coffee house vibe into the tea vibe. And I was reading something, I think it talked about there was a taxation of 119% on tea at one point, and the cost of tea, as Kim was talking about. You want to talk a little bit about that transition of what the coffee house meant into the women's world of the tea rooms?
Sure. So the 18th century became really popular with the coffee houses, and the coffee house was serving the tea. So even though it says coffee house, you're getting the tea there. The problem with the coffee houses was that women were excluded. It was men only. It was a gentleman's place to hang out, talk politics, read the newspaper, have manly time. And so there you could get this great tea, but the women couldn't get it. So it's like, hey, give me some tea. So where are the women going to get the tea? The women are going to get the tea from 3 places. They're going to get it from the pleasure gardens. So think Vauxhall. They had tea. You're going to get it from the bakeries. And the bakeries are what we would like to think of now as the tea rooms, but they weren't plentiful. They weren't like the coffee houses. But you could get tea at the bakeries. And Sally Loon's is a good example where, it's a perfect example, where it was a bakery. You go there to get bread. But hey, guess what? They had tea. So the women could get it at the pleasure gardens. They could get it at the bakeries, and then at a friend's house. and that's it. There was no tea room the way that we have it, the way that we have now. And it wasn't for quite some time that we would end up having tea rooms. So visiting friends was, I mean, obviously visiting friends is a lot more purpose to it. You're climbing the social ladder. You're making connections with neighbors. You're maintaining the connection with neighbors, even the neighbors that you don't like. You're there socially, but you also have the opportunity to get good tea. And the wealthier the family you visited, the better the tea. So it's all, all part of that. Why am I going to socialize if I don't want to socialize with a neighbor I don't like? Hey, at least they have tea. So another bonus, another little feather in the cap. Now, the gentlemen didn't have to worry. I mean, they had all the tea they could get, all the coffee they could get. I can't say that it was very good. All the things that I read about the coffee house coffee and the coffee house tea was that it was pretty bad.
It's not Starbucks.
No, it was pretty bad. There are so many different diaries and journals of folks at the time talking about how disgusting it was, but they liked the atmosphere. There was a very different atmosphere you could get from, say, a coffee house than from the local tavern. And coffee houses, didn't have liquor or anything, so what you're getting there is coffee and tea, but it was a much higher class, and I'm not talking about money. I'm talking it was a higher class of people in terms of education and conversation. You could talk politics with educated people. You could talk poetry with educated people, as opposed to, say, the tavern, where folks were there to forget while they socialize, not necessarily to converse about politics. I'm sure plenty of politics happen in taverns too, but I don't think that was quite the conversation type that most educated folks were going for. So the coffee house was, where the educated men could have tea as well as coffee, but not the women. The women had their social time, visiting friends and getting the tea.
And one of the links that I read off of your newsletter was talking about how smuggling tea in was such a big thing because of the price, and where was the best place to hide the smuggled tea but in the churches. Like, this was the spot that they were funneling the tea through at one point.
Makes you wonder, right?
It was very interesting. I think it just shows that it was like a phenomenon that was not going to be stopped. Like, the English were going to have their tea no matter what cost it took. And then, as you were saying, Kim, like all the taxation that started rolling because they realized tea was not going away. People wanted it to become affordable. So what could they do to bring that price down so that the average person could be drinking tea?
Right. And they just considered it yet another luxury good. So you saw, brandy and lace and silk and everything that was coming through the continent was being taxed. And so they thought, here's this beverage drunk only by the rich. It's a perfect opportunity. But the channel's only like 30 miles wide. So the smugglers just added tea to their list of things they brought over. And it was considered completely socially acceptable, don't you think, Paullett? Just, we see Parson Woodford talking about he bought tea from Tom the Smuggler and, like you said, hiding in some of those churches and probably a few casks of brandy as well. Ladies would talk about, I have this fine Brussels lace. Well, they weren't paying duty on that usually. And then even during the Napoleonic Wars, trade was supposedly shut down, but it wasn't. So
you can find in a lot of the historic homes that haven't been completely fully renovated. You can find the areas where they hid the smuggled goods. Sometimes you can find the trap doors where the smugglers would have come in from either the coast or an underground tunnel, and they're still there. And I love it when the historic houses that have those things have it as part of the tour feature. They've got everything labeled, and it's like, and here's the smuggler's route, as if it's something really cool and not something terribly illegal. And we're like, oh, this is so exciting, smugglers!
It's funny.
I would love to. You should post a list of houses that do that. That would be wonderful. Those were my favorite mysteries when I was a child. That every Nancy Drew, it seemed like it was always Smuggler's Cove, and there was this, or the English ones. I'm sure that there can't have been as many as there were in the books, but you just assume there's something underneath every house.
Right?
Yeah. We think of it being so prim and proper at that time that it's funny to think of like, these are the acceptable sins that we can commit. to smuggle these sorts of things in?
Well, are they really committing them? The servants are. So, you turn the other cheek and you reap the rewards. Their hands are clean.
It can sit on their souls, not on not on the owner of the house.
Well, and I don't know for sure, Paullett, you may have researched this more, but it seems that I've heard that they often would have an understanding. So brandy would appear in one of your outbuildings or in a special place, and then you would leave money, and it's not as if you actually bought it, it just appeared.
Right.
Yeah. So
right. The fairies.
And I think it's just standard thing. This is like speakeasies. Think of the great American fortunes that were made from smuggling alcohol here. And we know, like in America, doing a run around the British blockade with tea, like the Getty fortune was made that way. So it's respectable, I guess, if you're rich enough. It's like we're a generation or two removed, and then we'll forget where your money came from, right?
Then you have to wonder, am I really doing anything wrong? Like if you disagree with the law that much, you don't feel like, even though it is against the law, you don't feel like you're doing anything wrong. Like I'm bootlegging.
Yeah.
I'm not doing anything wrong. It's the government that's wrong.
Well,
why would you be taxing tea so much? You're the person in the wrong. My tea's not bad, so that I don't end up feeling remotely guilty by smuggling.
Yeah, well, I could see you could very easily make that case. And I've often thought it's hard for us to realize, nothing things aren't smuggled as much that way now, but maybe the exact analogy to that and bootlegging would be right now with all the different marijuana laws from state to state. And people don't seem to feel terribly guilty. It's like, well, if it's legal in Oregon, why shouldn't it be legal here? Yeah.
Right.
So
I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. So tea obviously was not illegal. It was just the taxation that they were trying to avoid, the markup that was so insanely high. So they were just kind of skirting the taxes.
Right. It's just another luxury good. And they eventually realized that it was kind of pointless and did lower the taxes, but it took a long time. It took till, do you remember, Paula? Did you notice? It was like the 18...
It was beyond my scope. It was beyond my time period.
I want to say around I think around 1869. So I read it last night, but I don't know the exact date.
Yeah.
It was
the same thing.
Various things, they kept tinkering with it, but it took a while. I know that.
Yeah,
that's what happened with the powdered, the powder for all the hair and all the wigs, where it's like, oh wow, everybody's using it. We can make a great deal of money on it, so we'll just tax it. And in that case, the people said, okay, we'll just not wear the powder. Like if you're going to end up charging us double what we already pay for your taxes, we'll just not wear it. It's gone out of fashion. Bye-bye. And then the government's like, oh, wow, we really messed up. I guess we shouldn't have taxed it. So I think that maybe, they weren't expecting that to happen with the tea, but they were expecting a different result of you're going to want it so much that you're going to end up paying these high taxes. And it's like, no, we'll always find a way around. Either we'll stop doing it altogether, or we'll smuggle it, or we're going to find a way.
Well, and it's interesting, a lot of people just did buy regular tea. We know the Austen family bought their tea from Twinings, and so they weren't buying smuggled tea. And my only thought on that is when I read about the tea that was available, like in country villages, as if, the equivalent of Ford's in Emma, that it was pretty dubious what you might get, and who knows where they were getting it. And they might say it was smuggled, but it might actually be adulterated, or it might be fake. There's I think we talked about this last time, Melissa, but there was I love to read American travelers would go to England or Europe, and then they would write up their experiences and have them published in the newspapers and make books out of it. And this one American at a coastal inn was served tobacco leaves as tea, which I'm pretty sure would poison you, right?
Yeah.
Nicotine poisoning. But being an American, he knew what tobacco leaves look like. So I've kind of postulated that the Austens bought their tea from a proper good shop because they actually cared about proper good tea.
Yeah.
So, and heaven knows, they were in Hampshire, which is a coastal county. So smuggled tea must have been, pretty thick on the ground. On the other hand, Mr. Austen was a minister, and he was a moral one. He was an actually took it seriously, so that may have had something to do with it as well.
Right.
Probably. So their neighbors did it, but they didn't do it.
Probably, yeah.
We have a question. So Rose says, wonderful. Can someone explain to me about taking tea during a ball? In Austen's books, they would take tea. Was it at a certain time, sit down, or buffet? And did dancing stop while tea was taken? Thank you. Thanks, Rose. Do either one of you want to talk about tea at a ball?
Paullett probably knows about as much about this as I do from I didn't see, did you show us your books, Paullett?
I have Paulett's books here to plug for her. So the first one in series is The Earl and The Enchantress. And then the other two are actually loaned out to my friend. She is reading them. So let's see, next would be the Duke and the Enchantress, then the Baron and the Enchantress. And then the newest one, I got to figure out the way the camera works, is the Colonel and the Enchantress. I love this one. I love them all so much, but
I'll have to look for those. Those look wonderful. Is it also an Enchantress, or is it just a new?
They're actually Georgian.
Woman with a Duke and a Colonel and a Earl. No?
Wait, say that again?
I said, is this the same Enchantress in each book?
Oh, I hope not. Different women. They've all enchanted the men in a different way.
I figured, yeah. I was like, oh, she gets
little polygamy going on there. No, go ahead. I mean, you focus more on the Jane Austen.
Right, yeah. And it's one of those things that when you start to read Austen or the novels of the time, suddenly that's all you can notice. Sort of like, if you ever broken a bone and suddenly everybody's got a cast, you're expecting and suddenly everybody is. The Persuasion is a very good example of, they called it the tea interval. And they would do this at concerts, long concerts too. They would usually take an actual break and go in and sometimes have a supper. So we see this at Emma, where they're going to have a sit-down supper. Sometimes that, depending on the event, that would take place at the end. But usually this is a refreshment break. And then you do see references to, like, in the octagon room and it's the upper rooms, isn't it? The octagon room in Bath. They had a separate tea room, and Austen talks about paying an extra shilling for their tea there. So whether it was public or private, they were expected to provide tea and refreshments, but then it depended. I think mostly during a ball, I've seen references to people taking a break and going in. And this is one of the key plot points in Northanger Abbey, that poor Catherine Morland is new to town. The first ball, the first public assembly she goes to, and that's what a public assembly is, as Paullett, I'm sure, knows, is a public dance. But the first ball she goes to, she can't get a partner. She doesn't get to dance. And then when she and Mrs. Allen go in for their tea, there's no gentleman to help them to tea. And that's what would happen at a ball. A gentleman would go and get the tea things from the staff, bring them back to the table, and then they would make the tea at the table, and as you would at home. I'm not sure if they made it there, but anyway, consume it there with your own teapot. And so she is marooned not only socially, but she can't get tea, which I think is tragic, That's the tragic part. And then the next time she goes to a public assembly, well, there she meets Henry Tilney, and because of that, she gets her tea. So it's sort of Austen's signal that all is right with the world, In preparation, Anne Elliot sits out tea, hoping to talk to Captain Wentworth.
Yes,
but he doesn't come. So, yeah.
We see, and I have a follow-up question for you. We see in a lot of these books the refreshment room, some kind of a reference to the refreshment room where they have lemonade and whatnot. So is this a competing thing, or is this a different kind of ball, like one that would have refreshments versus a sit-down or sit-out tea? Did they work in tandem?
Well, now that is a good question, because when I look at the descriptions of parties that were given, descriptions of what you could provide, like in cookbooks, so you come at it from both ends, it looks like it may have been somewhat up to the person. But certainly in the grand entertainments, when they had more money, you see, the Duchess of Thus and Such's ball, and they have, they've got the ballroom, the conversation rooms, they've got card rooms, at least one, because people who didn't care to dance. And then there's a refreshment room. But then they also would have a supper later, which changed in character as the years went by. We see a reference to that in Emma, where they would have a sit-down supper. And that did persist longer in balls, but sometimes it was just a sideboard. So Austen writes about one of her nieces going to an entertainment for younger people, young person's ball, and they had a sideboard with, hot foods and cold foods and syllabub and tea and lemonade and all sorts of goodies. But even then, coming at it from the other direction, I look at the directions to servants. They often talk about, watch for this time, watch for this signal, clear this out, bring the tables in. And so you do get the impression that for the most part, it was sort of like, and now we're going to have refreshments. Except for those, it's just like now, it's like at a party now. And you see references to people passing coffee and tea around. Mm-hmm. Like in Emma, remember Mrs. Bates and Mrs. Bates is at home. Miss Bates is talking about no coffee for me, a little tea, if you please. Yeah, so they're obviously passing coffee and tea at the beginning. So,
okay, well, and I think if we think about now, I think about if I go to like a donor party or something, they might have refreshments in the kitchen, and people can go and grab those refreshments anytime, or they might even have some kind of servant or staff, a caterer. There's the word I'm looking for. They might have a caterer coming around with trays, and it's mm-hmm. there and it's always available. Whereas if I go and visit a close friend who's having a party, they tend not to have the food sitting around or even catered. Somebody with a tray walking around. I don't tend to see that. I tend to see more, okay, now we're going to take a break. Okay, mm-hmm. Now we chatted in the living room for a while. Let's go ahead into the dining room and I'll bring out the snacks. And we actually sort of pause the party to have snacks. Right. And while we're snacking, we're still talking. But I see that even now where, it just depends on the hostess, where you've got one with food's always available. We've got mm-hmm. the refreshment area. And then the other is like, well, we're going to have food when I say we're going to have food. And it's not, like a full supper. It's just little snack foods, little finger foods, but I'm not going to bring it out until I'm ready. And then you can all come and get it.
Well, that's the impression I get when I read these. That the grander the event and the grander the people, then there's more food circulating all the time. But then you'd have, like you said, the pause and then the public balls. They definitely seem to take a break, go in, sit down, have the tea, probably because of the logistics, and then resume dancing or resume the concert.
I was thinking of the connection between Kim. We were talking about, her having to wait for the tea to be served, and she hadn't been introduced to any gentlemen, and this, reminding us of this dependence on a male being there to provide the tea for her. And in Paullett, in some of the links from your newsletters, it was talking about the popularity of the tea room because females could meet in it without being chaperoned in that sort of setting. And that was very revolutionary, that they could go somewhere and not have to have someone with them at all times. They could meet up with their friends, and the new social atmosphere that it presented, that was like so thrilling to them to be out and, could sit there and chat. And I was thinking so many tea rooms that I've been to with my mom, and it still has that feeling very much of like feminine atmosphere for you to sit and chat, and like a ladies' environment to it.
Oh yes, one of the tea rooms near me, I'm always surprised at, because there's always husbands with their wives, and there's always some presence of children, and I can't say that I've ever seen that at any other tea room. It always surprises me, because usually I see that very female environment. Mm-hmm. And even if I'm just doing, like, if I'm driving cross country in England and I'm just stopping, like, hey, I just need to stop and have a little snack. And I'll stop at a tea room, and everybody in there is a woman. And they're all having their quality woman time. Right. And there might be, one fellow who walks in and he's going to get something to go. But then he gets his item to go and he leaves. Yeah. It's not to say that I don't see families, or I don't see husbands and wives, or two gentlemen having tea at a tea room. It's not to say that I don't see that, but more commonly, it seems to very much be that woman's space. We have a time together where we're not bothered by our children, we're not bothered by our spouses, we're not bothered by home life. We can get away and we can escape. But the Little Place by Me, for some reason, it really draws families. I'm like, you guys are changing the culture. You're changing the tea culture here.
My dad always goes with my mom. They'll send me a text like every few months. Oh, they go to the British Tea Pantry in Michigan is their favorite stop. So they'll go in there every once in a while. My dad is like totally into the whole tea thing. So yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's fun that we can see things evolve. But I think I never really thought of it from that. It's so easy to forget how involved their lives were in having to have that chaperone there with them all the time. And I can't imagine how liberating that must have felt to be able to go somewhere and not have someone hovering behind you and talk with your friends.
Well, in the early, to Jane Austen's time, that the tea party at home was a way for women to have their own space and their own time. To the point where if men showed up, they would be criticized. I mean, they did. They liked to go and talk to the women, but they would be criticized as being, it was a bit effeminate, that you'd want to hang around with the tea and they always thought it was gossip. They talked about, they seem to associate it already with cat ladies. They said they called them tabbies. So, I mean, any lady gossiping, they would say with it, oh, be careful, the tabbies will talk about you. Like, yeah, why does that persist? But it's a thing. Although I have a dog, but
Paullett and I are cat people.
I would be if I weren't allergic. I love kitties. But...
Yeah.
Oh, I've got my little bird over here, my little parakeet, and I am actually amazed that she's being quiet during the panel when we were doing the book fest. We were talking. There's this background noise of chirp 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 chirp. She was really talking, so she was trying to carry on a conversation with me, and it's like, oh, that's being recorded. Everybody can hear you. She is at the moment sound asleep though.
Oh, I can hear the little bits in the back during it, but I thought it was so cute.
I didn't even hear it. I'm so used to it. I didn't even hear it until I rewatched the recording, and it's like, oh wow, I can actually hear her chirping the whole time. There was something I was going to add, and now I've forgotten what it.
Well, I have a question for you, Paullett. Because when are your books set in? What are they? Just Regency, or later? Have you written for later periods as well?
The big plan, I'm going to really be all over the place. It depends on the couple. It depends on what they're into, what works for the time. This particular series is actually pre-Regency. It's 20 years before the Regency even starts. But splitting hairs for folks who love the Regency, they're really not going to notice a difference. But 1790, yeah, 1790 to 1795 is this particular series. Now, okay, I say that, and the last two books in the series, which aren't out yet, they'll be out towards the end of the year, or at least one of them will be, anyway, out towards the end of the year. And it's going to be a prequel, and it's going to take place in the 1750s. So that's going to be a pretty drastic change. And if I do the children of this series, then they'll end up being, perfect for Regency era. They'll be right there in the Regency. But at the moment, I'm Georgian era. King George is still looking pretty spry. So pre-Regency.
Well, you can do it like Georgette Hare with These Old Shades. You remember when she went on to the grandchildren even? Have you read those? Yeah.
And that's what I would really honestly like to do. Like I want to, branch out to other families. I've got other series that I want to do first. But eventually I want to circle back and do the children, and then we'll get it'll end up, it reminds me of, as well as the Mallory series, Johanna Lindsay's Mallory series, where we end up with, I don't know, great grandchildren at some point. Like we're so far down the line of the Mallory.
Well, when you get a family you like, why not stick with them? So I think that's why we see the Austen continuations so much, is that we can't bear to let the characters go.
Yes. Right. We want to think about what children they might have had, and what they would have been like as parents. And there's also that did the love continue? Like what's love like 20 years later for them?
Yeah. Of course.
That in the book fest, and how like a really good book, you want to know what happens afterwards. Like even though you enjoy the happy ending, okay, tell me the next 50 years that they were happily ever after, and I want to know the rest of the story.
Well, there's a little bit of that. Jane Austen's sister, Cassandra, recorded a little bit of what happened in some of the books. So thank goodness we can tell. Or like the Watsons, we actually kind of know who ends up with whom. Wonder if we can talk Andrew Davies into doing that as a screenplay.
Well, maybe a different director.
Yeah.
There's a contentious thing to say. Okay, so I have a question for you.
Yeah, be careful. Everyone's very passionate about that.
So question for you. I can't remember, and I have not gotten around to looking at it. It's in one of the unfinished novels. She actually makes or hints at afternoon tea. There's some pretty big, and either she actually uses the words. I don't think she uses the words, but there's some sort of hint at them having afternoon tea, and it was 1804 or somewhere around there. And I thought that was pretty interesting, since the whole concept wasn't even started until Victorian era. But she hinted to it, and I can't remember what book it was. I wanted to go and look. It was one of the unfinished novels.
Well, Sanditon, they serve tea and toast muffin, when she visits the Parkers. I'm not quite sure when that was. Often, you're offered a bit of cake from the buffet, as Miss Bates does, and a glass of wine, but sometimes tea and biscuits, cookies. I cannot remember what time of day that visit took place when Catherine went there, but I think you're thinking of Sanditon.
I think so.
And that's
that was the one I most recently read, so it's probably on my mind. But I was, just kind of digging into the history of afternoon tea and all the different types of the low tea, the high tea, all of that, trying to figure out like when each was happening, since none of them were happening during the Regency. It wasn't happening until Victoria. I was trying to put my finger on it, because in the Regency they were still doing that. It just didn't have a name, and it didn't have the same kind of vibe. And I remember her talking about it, but I couldn't remember what.
Just like, technically they didn't have lunch, and yet you see people eating a nuncheon or cold meat, or so a little looser. But I know I have that urge too to pin things down, because we have, what is it? 1840 is Anna the Seventh Duchess of Bedford, right? Good old the invention of afternoon tea. Yeah,
she felt a little peckish.
Continuum, I'm sure. What's that?
I said she felt a little peckish. She just couldn't make it until supper.
Well, and I think it's like tea. When the Queen is, James Charles II's wife. I always have to do that. James. If the Queen is going to be drinking tea, well, then everybody's going to be drinking tea. And it doesn't matter whether it's taxed. It doesn't matter how expensive it is. Everyone's going to do it. So.
Could you talk a little bit about visiting somebody at their house for tea, and what did that look like? And I don't know if this is true or not, I've read in a few books lately where there was like 15-minute for your social calls and that sort of thing. And I don't know if that was part of the tea or separate from the tea, but like, what did these visits look like as you're coming in and out of people's homes?
Are you asking Paullett or me?
Either one of you that wants to answer, or both.
Yeah. Paullett probably knows a lot about the social niceties. If you've, it's again a continuum that we see in Austen's time, that they refer to having people to tea. Usually that meant after dinner. Okay. Because in a general sort of way, you would have tea with breakfast and tea after dinner. But you could be offered tea as a refreshment if they, wanted to. But it was considered a nice, cheap way to invite people to fulfill your social obligations. So you could just have them to tea. Okay. And, if you were invited to dinner, it would be expected you would stay to tea. But if you were invited just to tea, then you would come after dinner. So this is, you see this in Emma, that Austen talks about the less worthy females of I think it was the Cox family. Came after dinner, because Mrs. Cox's table only holds, I think I figured out one time it was like 14, which is Mrs. Bennet's table. I spent a lot of time counting up couples and adding and figuring out.
I love it.
It would be just a separate evening thing, and that was nice, because you did just have to serve tea And, if you had a bit of cake, some people serve coffee. But it was like now, like you give a cocktail party if you don't want to go to the expense of a big dinner.
Was there any morning tea? I feel like in so many historical romance novels, they're like coming in and out of tea in these morning times, or that could just be
breakfast. It's just like now. You'd have breakfast, tea. You'd have coffee. Okay. Mr. Darcy, after all, takes coffee at at the end of the book. I talk about this when I give a talk. But that's not breakfast. But anyway, we know Jane Austen's brother Edward likes coffee. I will just say, so when you see Darcy taking coffee, but I think Paullett will agree with me. I know you will, that it's not very good coffee. So I'm not.
I can't remember some of the comparisons but it was pretty bad. Like comparing it to soot. Like you're basically drinking what the chimney sweep.
Oh, that's a good one. I haven't heard that one. I did hear another one of those American diarists that compared it. He said, if you took American coffee and swirled the cup out and with a little bit of dishwater, that would be better than English coffee.
Oh, geez.
That's bad.
Stick with the tea.
Well, yeah. I think something we see a lot in the Regency books is basically an afternoon tea. We see folks coming in during the afternoon visiting hours, like 3 to 4, 2 to 4, that kind of range. They're coming in and they're basically having an afternoon tea. And kind of as Kim and I just mentioned, that didn't exist yet. It just didn't exist. Now, were people serving tea and biscuits? Were they serving tea and cake? Sure, why not? But that would be a sign of wealth. And that's, right, I would think, the only purpose. The guests are only there for 15 minutes, 30 minutes max. And honestly, that would be kind of rude because there's going to be other visitors and you're clogging up the chairs if you're staying that long. So if you're only there for 15 minutes and brewing the tea, steeping the tea, it's a process. You're gonna have to have a new tea tray brought in for every guest. Otherwise, they're gonna say, "Oh, hey, there's only 3 biscuits here. I'm getting leftovers." Kind of rude. So you're really showing off your wealth, and that's the only purpose. You're not necessarily saying, "I like you. I'm going to offer you refreshments." It's, I'm wealthy enough that I can do this. Right. I can expend all these leaves. I can expend all these biscuits, and I can do that for a 15-minute visit. But it wouldn't have been a cultural thing as it is now. I mean, every afternoon you have your afternoon tea, but that wasn't until like you said, 1840s. So that didn't exist.
I know there's so many anachronisms. Sometimes you just have to say, "Well, I enjoy the story," and and, that's probably one of the things that keeps me from trying fiction in a serious way. Is my mother said, "Wouldn't it be easier to do fiction than nonfiction because you wouldn't have to do all the research?" I'm like, "No, I think it'd be twice as hard because I do all the research, and then you still have to worry about story arc and characters." And
that's what I enjoy making these videos for, because I am still fairly new to historical romance and I love the stories, but I enjoy history, and I grew up learning American history, so I want to know what's real behind the story. So I'm always messaging Paullett, explain this to me. And I had the idea to make these videos so that as I'm learning, hopefully other people are enjoying learning in the process from experts like both of you.
There's definitely a lot of fictionalization there. Where I think it's fun is if the author knows and they're intentionally fictionalizing it. When the author doesn't know and they're including something as if it were true, that kind of gets to me. And I'm like, well, I realize that it's fiction, but I want to know that you know. I want to know that you know, and that you're intentionally breaking the rule, not accidentally because you didn't know. Ignorance is not an excuse when it comes to writing history. And so I was actually thinking about last night. No, not last night. It was but whenever I was writing the newsletter, whenever that was. I hope that wasn't last night because it came out yesterday morning. It was already out, so too late to do research then. I can't remember when I was pulling those links, but whenever I was thinking about in The Baron and the Enchantress, we have Lilith, who lives in a little, 1-bedroom cottage, and pretty much dirt poor. But every time she has a guest, well, she only has 2 guests. She has her brother, who brings the hero, and she has the Reverend Sands come. She has 2 guests, but each time she leaves them in the sitting room, which is right next to the kitchen, but she leaves them in there so that she can go into the kitchen and she can put together a little tea tray. Now, she did not go out and buy this tea. She has the massive herb garden in front, and so you have to wonder, what kind of herbs is she growing? Because I bet that's the kind of tea that she's serving. She certainly didn't buy it. So this is her way of showing not only what a great herbalist she is, what a great midwife she is to be able to grow these herbs, but also what a wonderful hostess, because she baked the biscuits, she baked the cakes, she baked all of this, and she wants to show what a great hostess she is, which is very different than what we might get, say, at I don't know, an aristocrat's house, where they're like, yeah, let's bring in the tea tray for the afternoon tea that we don't actually have, and I can showcase my wealth.
Yeah,
very different.
Which book is different ways of showing tea. So the tea made from love, and this is my humble house and what I have to offer you. And then I loved in the new, Kim, did you see the new Emma?
Not yet. No. Right when the pandemic hit is when that I was like 2 days too late, and then then I thought, do I really want to go out? But
yeah,
but I'm going to stream it when I get a chance here.
The tea times that they have and the plates and the trays is just so over the top with all these little cakes and everything. So talking about like showing off your wealth, I mean, they look like they came from the fanciest bakery you could imagine.
Well, wealth would have, at least one cook. Can I share with you? I actually put that in my Twitter bio that I'm almost a film consultant, because that film company came to me and asked me to be an on-set tea consultant for Emma. And so and they said, well, call me and let's talk about it. And I did. And they're like, oh, you're American. So we were hoping we could have someone just pop in when we need them on the set. And, I said, well, I could combine it with a research trip and just be over there several weeks. And they're like, well, no, I don't think we'll trouble you because we're not sure about the schedule. And I thought, maybe I should have just told my husband I was going to be in England 6 months. Why, yes, I'm there already. I could.
Right. I just moved,
Yeah. When it was all over, I thought, what was I thinking, So.
That would have been amazing. I don't know if you knew, Paullett actually goes back and forth between.
Yeah.
Except for now, right? Except for now, yeah. I ruined it. It's kind of ruined my whole summer plans. I had a book reading and book signing planned for this summer as well. Which at the moment, it's looking like I could probably do it, but I'm still not gonna risk it.
Where do you go when you go to England?
Typically Northumberland. It really depends on what I want to see. I might end up spending the time elsewhere or just traveling, but it's to the point where I've covered everything that I pretty much want to cover. So unless I want to revisit something, I go to where the family is, and so I just go to Northumberland every time, and I stay in Embleton and just enjoy being there.
Oh, and how nice to have an excuse.
Oh yeah.
I was about to go over, well, probably not this year, but I think next year. And now I think we're still going to be delayed then. But I want to go over and do a new edition of the Garden Book, because that came out in 2007 and it's out of print now. Although I still have a few copies of the paperback. But I thought I'd go over there, be a good excuse, go take some more pictures, update it, expand it maybe.
Your other books, they're so gorgeous. I can't even imagine a garden book because with the flowers, it would be so beautiful.
That was fun. That it's not, I don't think, as gorgeous as the At Home with Jane Austen, because they had a professional photographer and they sent him out to the Austen sites. And so like that picture on the back, I mean, to me, this looks like, I can't do here. Let's see. That looks like Hobbiton. You know what I mean? And it's like, I can't do that. But it was fun. I did take a lot of these pictures And I learned what I did is I just copied. It was so funny. See if I can find you one. Oh, like here I am skulking around at Brighton. And I sat there, and thank goodness for digital photography. I just sat there and took like 300 photos until one was good. Or this one, I was at the Georgian Garden in Bath, and I don't know if you can see, that's a gravel roller. And I now realize what photographers are doing, because I was actually lying on my back, taking the pictures through my feet. To get that angle that I wanted. And in fact, I was looking through some, I'm like, oh, that one might work. And then I realized I could see my toes on the sand. So now with digital photography, you can come up with some nice ones. But the other, I was really grateful they had a professional.
Yeah. It's good. I mean, I bought it just based off the cover because it was so gorgeous. And then I started reading the other day and I was like, oh, there's so much good stuff in here. It's not just a pretty coffee table book. There's so much information in here.
Thank you.
And now that I know it's going to be
just I write for myself, and I write for people who are fans of the movies and the books, but I also am writing for all my friends, who are professors, or my husband who's a history professor. It's like it's solid.
You have a lot of people to please.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't be happy. I don't. That's what I'm like you are probably, Paullett. If I did fiction, I'd have to do footnotes.
Honestly, sometimes I feel like I need to, because there will be historical facts that seem fictionalized, and so I'll even get reviews sometimes that say, oh wow, this was so inaccurate, because it included XYZ. And I'm like, oh, actually XYZ is true. Like smallpox inoculations. I had, they were at a hospital, and the doctor did smallpox inoculations. They're like, oh no, the smallpox vaccine didn't exist until, X date. And you're like 10 years before that. And it's like, well, there's a difference between the inoculation and the vaccine. Perhaps you should investigate the inoculation, because the inoculation was happening centuries before. So footnotes, sometimes footnotes.
What I thought I might do, and maybe that'd be something you could do, is have basically a footnote section, because all three of my books so far, the publishers, they let me have a bibliography, because I really wanted people to know where I got this from, but they wouldn't let me put footnotes in. And one of the publishers said, Kim, we don't want to scare people off. But then when they did the German editions, they came back to me and asked me for the footnotes, and of course I had them. So that was a very, very precise publisher there. But I thought maybe I could do them on my website, and maybe you could do that.
That's what I've been doing with the newsletters, and now I've been transferring the newsletter articles onto the website, so that if somebody actually wanted to look at the bonus material, my research is there, and they could actually see what was real, what was historical. With the same hospital, they had some pretty advanced machinery. They had electric machines. They had bellows for life support, because they had a lot of shipwrecks there. And this was all happening, in the 17th century. They had life support systems, not how we think of them today, obviously, but they had their own version, and just things that you wouldn't think were a real thing were a real thing. Now, kind of popping over to Melissa here, you were talking about Lindsay Brooks's book has a section in the back, and so I'm thinking maybe this might be an option. Instead of footnotes, have that section in the back that talks about that history. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So Lindsay Brooks wrote Striking Romance. And it's set in, I think it's 1904 in New York City. And what I loved about her book, because I think she said she was kind of trying to toe the line. It is romance, but she also wanted to add a lot of historical events into the book. So what she did was, at the end, she kind of breaks down what she picked from that decade and used in the book, but then gives you the dates that it actually happened, what the true story is, and then how she kind of fictionalized it and added it into her story. And I just love that, because it was like a whole extra bonus at the end of the book, that I read the story and I love the story. Now, as someone that enjoys history, I can read the events, then I can go online and do more research. And like, the book just felt like it kept on giving because of that. And
well, if I were to read
sharing too in your newsletters, and like leading me down other tangents of things to learn about.
Well, now that I know Paullett, I know that if I read her books, it's solid, right? And in fact, this might be something for you, Melissa, that I've thought about that. Thought about doing reviews, and I thought, well, I wouldn't have the heart to give a negative review, but maybe you could do it the other way around, where we really praise the ones who are accurate. Like I was thinking about my good friend Carrie Bebris, who does the Mr. and Mrs. Darcy mystery series. Are you familiar with those? And she, I mean, some of it, they have a little bit of paranormal and things because that was her background, but the history is really solid. So, and she'll come to me with, obscure little gardening questions or tea or something. And it feels like they should be, or someone like you, Paullett, you should be praised and people should note that.
Yes, I just did an interview with Paullett for my blog, and my mom read it, and she was like, oh my goodness, all the amount of time that she puts into researching before she even writes the story. And I think people don't necessarily realize that what a good author does, even though it's fiction, the amount of time they spend researching.
This is, two things to comment. The first thing is this is one of the reasons I am now in love with Mimi Matthews' writing. I have not read all of her books yet, but back in the day, and I won't stay here too long, but back in the day, I specialized in Victorian literature. And when I read stories that are written during the Victorian time, it's a modern heroine within an industrial setting, or even a steampunk setting, and I'm like, this is not the angel in the house. This is not the Victorian woman. And when I read her books, it's so amazing because she gets it, and the historical accuracy it's just phenomenal, and so I'm so in love with her books now because of the historical accuracy. So if I leave a review, and I don't leave negative reviews, but I do leave positive reviews, just like you were saying, Kim. I leave positive reviews for folks that use historical accuracy and create the plot and the challenge of the love story around that accuracy. Because I think that's really kind of the point there is love at such times was just near impossible. So how do you combat the roles of society and even the upbringing, say, of the Victorian woman? How in the world, when you have this completely submissive woman, how do you find love? And that's what I love. I love to see the plot work out with the accuracy. But the second thing I wanted to mention is, as a fiction author, there is that moment where you have to say, even if I know the history, even if I know the accuracy, do I want to break a rule? And sometimes it's a good choice, sometimes it's a bad choice. Perfect example. There are some words, there are some phrases that are very British, and it's part of the culture. And I want to use them in the books, but all of them, just go with all of them, they weren't invented until 20th century. Very modern phrases, very modern words. But it's like it's so ingrained, it just feels natural to include it. But if I know it's inaccurate, so the struggle's there. So one of the words that I ended up choosing to keep, it's not actually in the kernel because I'm still with that struggle of do I not use it? Do I use it? Cuppa. It's part of the culture, so it feels so natural to talk about having a cuppa. I can't remember the etymology, but it didn't exist until 20th century. We'll go with 20th century.
Well, people don't speak. I mean, you can get away with that, I think. Let's just say you can, because that's a transliteration of dialogue. And so if you read, you think that they weren't using contractions in Jane Austen's day, but then you read someone from the time writing, it's not as much, but thieves can't, or servants dialogue, and you realize that they were doing that. And so if you might read do not, but probably they were coming close to saying don't. Well,
you have to wonder
how ain't is aunt.
Like that. Oh, go ahead.
Well, ain't is aunt, of course, with an accent, aunt, right. And then if it's ain't. And so it's a little hard to tell, because it's like now if you write things down, we use a more formal English.
Yeah.
and it doesn't always reflect how we speak. And yet, if you do dialogue, sometimes that's awkward. You know, if you see some of us, say Mark Twain or something, when he does the accent, well, it's terribly helpful to know how people were speaking, but it's kind of tedious to read sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's, but I think you should just cuppa, yeah, because you know.
You have Kim's permission, go for it.
Right? If Kim says I can do it, I can do it. But I have to think a lot of these words and phrases, they were already in the dialogue. They've been in the dialogue, and it isn't until, and when it makes it to the etymology dictionary, it's sort of the first time it was written, the first time it was published, the first time they found it, you know, in a factual place, they could point to it, not something that had been used for decades. And so how many of these words have been used for decades or centuries, and it just took longer for it to get into the dictionary. So I kind of justify myself sometimes with that, where it's like, okay, I know this word didn't exist in a written form, but I'm going to pretend that it was used. But I try to use it.
Yeah, no, we're always going to be making some mistakes. I was thinking about how whatever we, you know, unless you've experienced the culture as you lived it, you're not aware of the nuances. So we might think we have a notion of 1920s dialogue because I've watched a lot of movies and read a lot of books. And yet I'm sure that there's, you know, the 5 years difference between when a slang word came in, you know, and that must just be completely magnified when we go back, you know, 100 years, 200 years or more. I think that when I do dinners, recipes, cookbooks are retrospective and prospective. And so, you know, I will look for recipes up to about 1830. But then you get little clues. Like I was reading along and I thought I had this great menu. And then I happened to read a novel. What do they call one of the Silver Fork novels of the late Regency? And they were mocking people for serving the very thing I had in mind because it was so, you know, kind of like a nouveau riche thing to do. And I thought, you know, at some point you just got to kind of say, look, we're having fun. We're interpreting it. We do our best.
I still want to serve the dish.
Yeah.
With a disclaimer.
That reminds me, like, thinking of things being trendy and in the time, like what we thought was like the it thing then and that night. And I keep going back to your book, but when you were talking, there's another letter with Jane, and she was talking about they were going to the shops and there was hats that had ribbons and then these ones with fruit. And she was talking about like her not being a fan of fruit, but it was like the in thing. And it just made me kind of chuckle at how, like, even back then there was, you know, that is not my style sort of feel to things.
Yeah. Oh, that was funny because fruit was more expensive. And so she was writing to, they would shop if one or the other was gone without the other and they were in Bath or London. They would pick up things for the other, order clothing. And she was talking about the difficulty they had finding affordable fruit. And then she said, and at the end of the letter, or at the end of that section, she said, but I can't help thinking it's more natural to have flowers growing out of the head than fruit.
Yes, I laughed out loud at that. I appreciate that line. Yeah.
So,
and so that was another, totally going off topic, but something that I was thinking about, you know, us being at home now, and I was just telling my husband, I ordered something like 2.5 weeks ago and it hasn't even shipped yet. And we're so used to, like, you know, the same day almost, it feels like packages are at your door, and getting used to life now and things are coming so much slower. And I was reading about how when someone would go into town, they would take this big long list because it was such an event. Like, can you buy me this and this and this and all these things that everyone told you what they wanted, and then you went off to the town because it was such an event to go into a store, which kind of like it is now. Like, it's an event when you know, I'm so used to, you know, impulse shopping at the grocery store and you grab things, and now my husband one time a week, and we make our list of what he's going to get when he's at the store, and the same feeling of it being a big deal to go to the shop.
Yeah, we've kind of doing a little time travel here, aren't we?
Absolutely.
My 23-year-old went shopping a couple of days ago, and we planned that for like 2 days. You know, like, okay, no, wait, we've got to think this through. You know,
right?
Yeah.
Kind of gives us a glimpse to maybe what it felt like for them, that you need to make sure you know what you need because you're not going back to shop again. And
sure.
Yeah.
And also what it must have been like to be, if you weren't in a city, if you were out on your own estate, well, you're growing your own food. I'm going to do vegetables again this year. And I haven't done that for a couple of years because I was busy.
Right.
But the one thing I can't bring myself to buy is greens, lettuce. I don't just get creeped out thinking about it.
My son is dying. We do like a little garden every year. We just did salsa garden last year, but this year he wants to grow lettuce because he's a huge salad eater. So my mom's been sending him little YouTube videos because they have a huge garden at their house of how to garden and how to start your lettuce leaves in the little glass jars and all that. So he's super excited.
Lettuce leaves in glass jars, really?
Yes, I have a video. You cut the stem off the romaine and do a certain process with the water, and you can regrow from the stems.
Oh, fun!
Yeah, it's interesting. We'll see if it works. At least it did a YouTube video.
Well, I don't see why not, because that's kind of the method that a lot of people that I use now in the garden with salad is they call it cut and come again.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And actually, until it starts bolting and going to seed, I will go out and just pick a few leaves from each plant.
Yeah, exact same sort of concept, but just in a canning sort of jar.
Oh, wow.
So we will see.
Yeah. So we're all sharing our skills here.
I'm a butterfly gardener, not necessarily a vegetable or fruit gardener. Although I do have a pretty amazing herb garden. But the herb garden wasn't exactly my intention of I want to grow an herb garden. It was, there are quite a few butterflies that use herbs as host plants, and so I have this fabulous herb garden for the butterflies. So even still, I still just have a butterfly garden. But if I wanted to, go out and get some parsley or something, then I could, because it's out there and it's pretty prolific.
The swallowtail butterflies like parsley, don't they?
Say again?
Swallowtail butterflies like parsley.
Yeah, we've got fennel, fennel, parsley, and I want to say we also have some oregano for the swallowtails, and then of course milkweed and wild senna and carries on. But milkweed, that's not an herb.
Yeah, I've got a patch of it's wild volunteer milkweed, and I know it's invasive, but I can't bear to take it out because it's like milkweed. We got to have it. So.
Exactly. If the butterflies enjoy it, go for passion vine. It takes over. It absolutely takes over. It is the most invasive vine I think I have ever met. But the fritillaries like it. So as long as the fritillaries like it, I'll have passion vine, and it has beautiful flowers. So why not?
You got your priorities straight. That's
exactly. We've got pretty flowers and a ton of butterflies. So why not? But I haven't tried vegetable gardening. Other than accidental, maybe I get some mulch or get some soil, and it happens to have a melon vine growing in it, and I'm like, oh, I'm a vegetable gardener. That's as close as I've gotten.
When I was growing up, we lived in the suburbs, but in the front of our house, my mom and dad, we always had so much garden. We had zucchini plants all in the front. And if you've seen zucchini plants, when they start growing, they are just gigantic, and the leaves are so big. And people would stop as they're going around. What are the bushes that you have in the front? And sort of and we'd be like, it's zucchini. We're just randomly growing it in the city. We had corn off to the side of our house. I mean, you name it, we had some sort of vegetables growing.
That's a good idea. Maybe I could put some in pots in the front. I was thinking the way I've got my back now, one zucchini would take over normally I'll grow ornamental patterns of my lettuce and that kind of thing. But you have one good cherry tomato or a zucchini and it just wipes out the whole rest of the garden. So
yeah,
maybe in the front.
Pretty big.
Tell them it's an ornamental.
Cucumbers grow perfectly in planters, though. I always have my son do cucumbers because he likes to put the cage on and he'll wind it all up as it grows through the summer, and those are a lot of fun.
I saw a neat thing that I thought I might try, that you put a trellis, 2 trellises like this, and the vine out here, and then the fruits hang through in the tunnel.
Oh, that'd be nice and easy.
Yeah, you have to make it big enough where you wouldn't have to crawl.
You're an expert after those pictures you were taking. You can wiggle all around.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that was funny. A lot of pictures that if you really think about what I put in that book, you'll see I was probably lying on the ground. But I'm real photographers are doing that too. We just didn't.
For that perfect shot.
Well, we had two more comments, and then I should let you ladies get going. But Heather said, "I love the picture from the back of At Home with Jane Austen. So gorgeous." And Rear Admiral 00 said, "I loved Suspicion at Sanderson." So I don't know. That must be.
Well, that's Carrie Bebra's the Mr. and Mrs. Darcy Mr. series. So it's kind of like Nick and Nora Charles meet. But it's Elizabeth Bennet and Darcy, Elizabeth Darcy now, as sleuths. And everything kind of like Pride and Prescience, Suspense and Sensibility. And then what did you say that one was?
Suspicion at Sanditon.
Yeah, that was the last one. So
I will. Soon.
Matters at Mansfield. I'm trying to think of what they all were, but they're just charming. It's really, she was one of the first to do this, and now of course it's a whole world unto itself.
Yeah.
You're giving us more books for our to be read our to be read list.
Well, Paullett, I'm impressed with your newsletter. If you go to my website, it's not bad, but there's all these pages that say coming soon, for 3 years. I like your idea of doing it as like supplemental material, bonus material, because there's all this stuff that you can never put in a book, and it's so neat. And that would be perfect, and it wouldn't have to be huge blogs. I think that's what always puts me off. I think, if I have time to do that, I should be writing, but just do a little thing. And
that is pure. And some people like it, some people don't. So far I've only gotten compliments, but I would assume that not all readers would want the extra information. But that's my intention of the newsletter, is to have supplemental research, character development. How did I develop this character? And there are a lot of folks that will say that they really related to a character. How did you know me? How did you get me so well? And it's like, well, I don't know you, but I'm glad you could connect to my character. So the newsletter is showing this is how I got to know this character, and then by doing so, I guess you as well. But it's all about character development, the research. There is flash fiction in everyone, and so I know some readers like the flash fiction, but not necessarily the supplemental research or the character development. But then some people like the character development, and not everybody likes a little something different. But I always feel like so much goes into the book that you don't know, so much background that you don't know, and you might want to know it. And I'm that type of reader. Maybe this sounds silly, I don't know. I'm that type of reader where when I fall in love with a hero, sometimes a heroine, if I fall in love with this couple, I don't really want them to go away. I want to live in their world, and I want to spend more time with them outside of the book. So if I can get to know them even better, what's their horoscope? What's their zodiac sign? What's their Myers-Briggs? What do they like? What's their favorite color? Like, I want to get to know them. I want to spend more time with them. And that's what I like as a reader. And so then I kind of build the newsletter off of, well, what would I like? I want to spend more time with these characters. And probably some people don't. Once it's done, it's done. But I get really stuck on characters. I want to spend more time with them.
You must do some of that beforehand. You must build them. You must decide what their favorite color is ahead of time.
Oh yeah. Oh, there is some growing space. Like I have a very intricate profile. I know everything. I know their shoe size. I mean, everything's there. But it's still so. I don't know. It's me creating the character. So once I start writing and the character really comes to life, there'll be so many changes where I think I have a clear vision, and they're like, no, actually, you said my favorite color was brown. I don't know why you said that. Maybe because I like to wear brown waistcoats, but that's not my favorite color. And I'm like, oh wow, that's surprising. I didn't realize that. And they end up developing into their own person. And perfect example was the hero from the Duke and The Enchantress. So you have the Duke, and I thought that he was a Sagittarius. I wrote a Sagittarian character. Everything about him said to me Sagittarius. And then I come to find out as I got to know him, no, he was a Gemini. And I ended up unearthing this whole background personality. So he had his face to the world, and then he had his own hidden personality his private personality that he exposed to no one except for his trusted few. This is who I really am, but this is how you see me. And I was just seeing him when I created the profile. I was seeing him face value.
Mm.
I was seeing what he saw, what he gave to the rest of the world. And so by getting to know the character, I realized I had him pegged wrong. And I designed his character during the Earl and The Enchantress. He was a cousin. He was never going to get a starring role. And that's how I saw him. He was just that charismatic cousin who never would shut up. That annoying guy in the corner who was flirting with all the girls. But when I got to know him, I was like, wow, there's more to you than this. And I had aspects of his profile that were wrong. So yeah, you know the characters in advance, but then they surprise you and they develop as people of their. I'm sitting there talking about characters as if they're real people. Oh Lord.
Writers say that. It's, you know, I mean, and I've just done a few chapters of about 3 different books just for fun because I'm supposed to be doing something else. So then, you know, it's like suddenly I have an urge to clean my closets and write. Same thing. I actually had a character I thought was the main character, and he just was completely sunk by the secondary character. And I don't know where I'm going with it yet, but I now believe that the characters take over. It's
it happens.
Interesting insight into the writer's brain, Paullett. I love to hear this. That's why it's fun, Melissa. I'm glad you're doing this. You said you also did interview Paullett as
I did my blog. I did a blog post so people could just kind of do a read through of interviewing different authors and kind of getting an idea of their writing, what goes on behind the scenes. And Paula, I have to say, so I read book 2 where the Gemini character ends up becoming the main character. And then we went on a trip and my poor husband was stuck in the car with me talking about that book like so much because I was like, oh my goodness, this book just blew my mind because I'm a Gemini. So I totally connected with him and the music, the tie-in, the everything. And I love when you read her books, Kim, you'll see. So the first story and the second story kind of timeline overlaps a bit. And I loved when you kind of get that glimpse of like, oh, that was happening in the first book when this is going on now. Like they were having tea and they knew that somebody else was gone. And I loved it. But yeah, he heard a lot about that book. I loved the character. I loved that you figured it out in the first book that he had the Gemini 2 sides to him.
Yeah, at first I just thought he was what he seemed. He was exactly what he looked like. And he wasn't, but I don't know that. And you'll hear writers sometimes talk about characters hijacking a scene too. And it's like, well, you're the writer, you're in control. And it's like, but no, when you're in the mind of that character, you are that character. And so you're tapping out a scene that you have sketched. You plot it well, I mean, unless you're a pantser, but if you're a plotter, which I'm a plotter, you have everything plotted, you know exactly how the scene's gonna go. You know what they're supposed to say. And you're in the middle of it, and all of a sudden they're saying something completely different. They're reacting completely differently. Everything's gone awry, and you're like, no, this is not what I planned. It's because you're into that character, and the character ends up doing something that you didn't think it was in them, and that character is developing as their own person. And they hijack the scene, so it becomes character development. But yeah, writers have only partial control. You've got the directors, then you've got the actors, and the actors sometimes improvise. That's kind of what happens. I'm just the director.
I think you're an actor though, as a writer, because you're acting out each one of these characters and taking on their persona. And I never really thought, I know we're always talking about characters hijacking the story, but I've never really thought about how you put yourself in that character, their thoughts and what's coming out. I think that's amazing. It's such an insight into what goes on as you're writing.
And it can be difficult too, because if you think of, say, the scene in The Colonel and The Enchantress, where he wakes up in the middle of the night. I'm going to give spoilers here. He wakes up in the middle of the night, and he has an unsettling reality to do with an old war wound. We'll leave it at that without any spoilers. Mm-hmm. And that was a very difficult scene to write, because I have to, in that moment, be the soldier in bed, waking up and experiencing this. I'm not, and reading it and writing it, I think, are two very different things. Where if I read it, I probably wouldn't have an emotional response. Not gonna lie. As writing it though, I was in tears the whole time I was writing it. I was crying, I was sobbing, and I'm like, why am I so emotional? But it was because I had to experience it with him. What would it be like to wake up and discover what I discovered? What would it be like to wake up and experience this level of pain and fear? And I had to experience that, not literally, but I had to experience that. And so I'm sobbing while I'm writing the scene because I'm so into that character. So sometimes it's happiness, sometimes not so much. But if you're in the character, these things really should be happening. You're experiencing it with them.
That's fantastic. All right, one last thing. Kim, there's a question for you. What recipe were you going to include? I'm guessing when you said you were left one out earlier.
Oh, what you mean? Just today I said that?
Yeah, you had talked about making a menu, and then you did some research.
Oh. Okay.
I didn't know.
I forget the exact name of it, but it was just a wildly, and I could see why it would not be considered upper class, but it was, you made a thatched cottage out of spaghetti, cooked spaghetti, in a mold upside down. And so you lined it with cooked spaghetti. So this is like a Georgian recipe when they were fascinated by spaghetti, Thomas Jefferson and then you fill it, and I do not remember what it was filled with, but then it was chilled and unmolded, and so it looked like a thatched cottage. And I'm like, I have to do that. That is amazing. But then I actually ran into a reference to that recipe, and I forget if it was in this one novel that I read, or if someone is referring to it as being an old-fashioned recipe. And I thought, okay, so this is the exact equivalent of someone trying to set a novel in 2020, and they've got a meal that is mostly nouvelle cuisine, and someone insists on putting, a Betty Crocker casserole from 1952 in it, And of course, people alive at the time would be like, well, this is very peculiar, but we wouldn't know, right?
Right.
So I may still just put it in. I'm working on a cookbook now, and I may put it in anyway. And, hey, if you. Why do we care? No one from that era is going to catch us,
Oh, that is too funny.
And that may be a moment where you add that little footnote or that little ending scene where that little ending note where you explain this recipe would have been, for this class and this time, and yeah.
Oh, exactly. Well, and sometimes I won't know either. You can tell if it's a French book, obviously, if it's someone who is the former chef to the Marquis de whatever, or the Prince Regent, it's a different level. And then there's cookbooks that were aimed at just someone who had, like the Austens did, a woman from the village who would come and cook for them. So
there's a fantastic BBC documentary about hosting a ball and the dancing that goes behind it and everything like that. And
I think I have that on my DVR. I haven't seen it yet. Yeah,
it's really good. This one is like a few years old, I think. I'll send you the link to it if you have.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, I'll put it down below, so if anybody else wants to see it. But it is really fascinating in how many molds they use in the buffet that they were setting out, the dinner that they were having after the ball. And he was talking about, how tipping everything over and you hold your breath and it was like this huge church steeple, all these things that they were making, and you get one try for this to turn out for the night.
Well, depending on how warm it is, I do jellies. I've been experimenting with jellies, and the ones that are stiff enough to hold themselves at room temperature are different from what we would find acceptable now. They're a little weak. But on the other hand, you tip it upside down and it just goes sploot. It's like, no, that wasn't it. And sometimes that you'll be reading and the recipe will say, add a sufficient amount of a good stiff jelly. Okay, let's figure that out 5 experiments later. What does that mean?
Well, Kim, popular opinion is that everyone wants to see this fancy cottage, so you need to put it in your cookbook.
Okay, I'll do that as a blog post or something. That would be fun. So.
Yes, that would be amazing. Well, thank you so much. I feel like we could talk forever, but we should probably let you go. And thank you to everyone that hung out with us the whole time and watched. We really appreciate it. And hopefully there'll be more to come, and we can talk about more in tea and gardening. I would love to talk with you about gardening too. That would be
sure. That'd be great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. This was really fun.
And Paullett, go write the rest of those books. I need more.
I know. I need to step up my game here.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for hosting.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye-bye.